My name is Victoria, 58 years old, a retired elementary school teacher from Boston. My only son, Thomas, meant everything to me, and I dreamed of his wedding day. For years, never did I imagine that instead of joy, I would experience the deepest humiliation when his bride, Cassandra, publicly told me to leave, shouting those cruel words that still echo in my mind. The shock of that moment changed everything, leading me to make a decision that would alter all our lives. When I canceled the wedding funding, I had no idea of the consequences that would follow. If you're watching this and have ever felt betrayed by someone you tried to welcome into your family, let me know where you're from in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe as I share how I turned this heartbreak into a blessing. Becoming a widow at 46 wasn't in my life plan. Robert and I had been college sweethearts, married for 22 years, when cancer took him swiftly and without mercy. Our son Thomas was only 16 when his father passed, leaving me to navigate the murky waters of single parenthood during those critical teenage years. Robert had been a financial advisor, pragmatic about money and practical about death. The life insurance policy he insisted on purchasing gave me financial stability, allowing me to continue my career as an elementary school teacher while providing for our son. Every extra dollar I saved went into a fund for Thomas first, for his college education, then for his future, whatever that might hold. Those first years after losing Robert were a blur of grief, interspersed with the daily responsibilities of raising our son. Thomas and I developed a close relationship, born from our shared loss. He was a thoughtful boy who grew into a compassionate young man, excelling in his studies and eventually earning a scholarship to attend university in Chicago, studying engineering like his father had. My life revolved around my classroom during the school year, in my quiet home during summers and holidays, waiting for Thomas to visit. I made peace with my solitude, filling my days with book clubs, volunteer work at the local library, and regular dinners with my small circle of friends, most of whom were fellow teachers or neighbors I had known for decades. Everything changed 3 years ago when Thomas called me on a Sunday evening, his voice animated in a way I hadn't heard since before his father died. He had met someone. Her name was Cassandra, a business major at his university. They had connected at a campus fundraiser, and Thomas couldn't stop talking about her intelligence, ambition, and beauty. I was thrilled. My son deserved happiness, and I had worried about his tendency to isolate himself, focusing exclusively on his studies since losing his father. I first met Cassandra during their spring break visit to Boston. She was indeed beautiful, with long auburn hair and an impeccable sense of style that made me feel slightly self-conscious in my practical teacher's wardrobe. She was polished and well-spoken, the kind of young woman who seemed to have everything figured out by her early 20s. She complimented my home, asked questions about my teaching career, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about Thomas's childhood. Yet something felt off about her warmth, a certain performative quality I couldn't quite place. When Thomas left the room to take a work call, her smile dimmed several watts. When he returned, the brightness switched back on instantly. I dismissed my concerns as the natural wariness of a mother seeing her son with a serious girlfriend for the first time. No one would ever be good enough for my Thomas, I reasoned. I needed to give her a fair chance. Over the next 2 years, I saw them during holidays, in the occasional weekend visit. Each time, I noticed how Thomas would defer to Cassandra on seemingly everything from restaurant choices to opinions on current events. The confident, thoughtful young man I had raised began to parrot her viewpoints and preferences. Again, I told myself this was normal, just part of the compromise of being in a relationship. Then came the engagement. Thomas called me one evening, excitement bubbling through the phone as he told me he had proposed, and Cassandra had said yes. He had used his grandmother's ring, which I had given him on his 21st birthday, telling him it would be for the woman he chose to spend his life with. I was genuinely happy for him, pushing aside my lingering reservations about Cassandra. If she made my son happy, that was all that mattered. A week later, Thomas called again, this time with a different tone. They had been discussing wedding plans, and Cassandra had her heart set on a destination wedding at a vineyard resort in Napa Valley. Her parents, he explained, weren't in a position to contribute much financially. Thomas was apologetic, knowing the cost would be substantial, but I immediately offered to help. I had been saving for his future for years, and what better use for that money than helping him start his new life with the woman he loved. Looking back, I should have recognized the red flags when Thomas mentioned that Cassandra's parents couldn't contribute much, despite their apparent wealth. Her father was a successful surgeon, and her mother came from old money. Their inability to contribute wasn't about resources, but priorities, a truth I would come to understand too late. The wedding was set for the following June, giving us 14 months to plan. I imagined bonding with Cassandra over wedding details, perhaps forming the mother-daughter relationship I had always wanted. I envisioned us shopping for her dress together, selecting flower arrangements, and sharing tearful, joyful moments as we prepared for the big day. Reality, as it often does, had other plans. The first real sign of trouble came during an initial planning lunch with Cassandra. I had flown to Chicago for the weekend, eager to help the young couple start organizing their special day. We met at an upscale restaurant of Cassandra's, choosing where she arrived 20 minutes late, offering no apology. I had brought a beautiful wedding planning binder as a gift, filled with checklists, budget worksheets, and inspirational photos I thought she might like, based on Thomas's descriptions of her taste. Cassandra glanced at it briefly, thanked me with a tight smile, then pulled out her sleek tablet. "I've already created a digital planning space," she said, turning the screen to show me an elaborate Pinterest board and spreadsheet system. "It's more efficient this way, and everyone involved in planning can access it remotely." I nodded, feeling foolish with my old-fashioned binder. Of course that makes sense. I'd love to be included in that digital space. "I'll have Thomas add you," she replied, though I noticed she never actually made a note of it, and the invitation never came. Throughout lunch, Cassandra detailed her vision for the wedding. When I gently suggested incorporating some family traditions, like the blessing my grandmother had written that had been read at both my wedding and my sister's, Cassandra smiled politely. "That's sweet, Victoria, but we're envisioning a very contemporary ceremony. No outdated rituals or religious elements." Thomas, who I knew had always appreciated our family traditions, said nothing, squeezing my hand under the table in what felt like an apology. As the months progressed, a pattern emerged. Cassandra would make decisions, inform me after the fact, and expect me to simply write checks. I was copied on emails to vendors, but soon realized my input wasn't wanted. When I called the florist to ask about possibly adding some lily of the valley to the arrangements, as they had been Robert's favorite flower, and a way to honor his memory at the wedding, I discovered Cassandra had instructed all vendors to take direction only from her. The florist, embarrassed, explained, "The bride was very clear that any changes need to come directly from her." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Marshall." When I called Thomas to discuss this, he sounded stressed. "Mom, please don't go around Cassandra on the wedding plans. She's really particular about how she wants things, and it's causing tension when you try to make changes." "I wasn't trying to take over," I explained. "I just thought it would be nice to have a small tribute to your father." There was a pause before Thomas replied. "Cass thinks it's morbid to reference death at a wedding. She wants everything to be positive and forward-looking." I swallowed my hurt. Robert had been dead for 12 years, but his absence still felt fresh, sometimes, especially when facing these milestones without him. Apparently acknowledging him at his only son's wedding was now considered morbid. 4 months before the wedding, I flew to Chicago again to attend a tasting at the catering company, handling the reception. I had assumed I would be included in this important decision, especially since I was paying over $15,000 for the meal. Thomas had confirmed my invitation, but when I arrived at the venue, Cassandra seemed surprised to see me. "Oh, Victoria, I didn't realize you were joining us today," she said, her voice pleasant, but her eyes cold. "Thomas told me about the tasting. I thought it would be fun to do this together," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. Cassandra glanced at Thomas, who looked uncomfortable. "Well, we've already selected most of the menu. We're really just finalizing a few details." The tasting turned out to be little more than a formality. Cassandra had indeed already selected everything from the appetizers to the wedding cake flavor. My presence was superfluous, a fact made clear when she and the caterer discussed several details while I sat silently, feeling increasingly invisible. That evening, I invited Thomas out for dinner, alone, hoping to speak with him candidly. We met at a small Italian restaurant near my hotel, and for a brief time, it felt like the old days, just the two of us enjoying each other's company. But when I gently broached the subject of my concerns, his demeanor changed. "Mom, I know this isn't going exactly how you pictured it," he said, twirling pasta around his fork without eating it. "But this is Cassandra's dream wedding. She's had a vision of this day since she was a little girl." "I understand that, honey, but I'm starting to feel like an ATM rather than the mother of the groom. I'd like to be involved in some of the decisions, especially since I'm covering most of the expenses." Thomas put down his fork and looked at me directly. "The thing is, Mom, Cassandra feels like you're trying to take over. She says you have outdated ideas about weddings and that you're making things more complicated." The words stung. Have I been difficult? I've agreed to everything she's wanted. The venue, the flowers, the photographer, all her choices. "It's more about your attitude," he said, then immediately seemed to regret his words. "I didn't mean it like that. It's just, Cassandra is sensitive. She feels judged by you." "Judged, Thomas? I've been nothing but supportive. I haven't criticized a single choice she's made." He sighed. "Look, can you just go along with what Cassandra wants? It's her big day, and I want her to be happy." "It's your day too," I reminded him. "And what about your happiness?" "Making Cassandra happy makes me happy," he said, with finality, signaling the end of the conversation. As the wedding drew closer, I discovered that Cassandra had been making changes to the guest list without informing me. My oldest friend Susan called one evening, confused about why she hadn't received an invitation. "I thought maybe it got lost in the mail," she said. "The wedding's only 8 weeks away." I assured Susan I would check on it, assuming it had been an oversight. When I contacted the wedding planner, a lovely woman named Adrienne, who had always been kind to me, she hesitated before responding. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Marshall, but Ms. Reynolds provided a revised guest list last month. Several names were removed, including Susan Wright." I was stunned. There must be a mistake. Susan is like family. She's known Thomas since he was born. I can forward you the email with the revised list, Adrian offered sympathetically. The email revealed that Cassandra had cut nearly a dozen of my friends from the guest list, people who had been important figures in Thomas's life. When I called Cassandra to discuss this, her explanation left me speechless. The venue has capacity limitations, she said coolly. We needed to prioritize friends who are relevant to our current lives, not people from Thomas's childhood, who he rarely sees anymore. These people are important to me, I argued. They've been part of our family for decades. This wedding isn't about you, Victoria, Cassandra replied, her voice taking on an edge I had never heard directly before. We need room for people who matter to our future, not your past. I took a deep breath. Cassandra, I'm paying for this wedding. I think I should have some say in who attends. There was a long silence before she responded. I didn't realize your financial contribution came with strings attached. I'll talk to Thomas about this. Hours later, Thomas called, clearly agitated. Mom, why did you upset Cassandra? She's been crying all evening. I explained the situation with the guest list, expecting him to see the unfairness of it. Instead, he defended Cassandra. The venue really does have strict capacity limits, and Cassandra had to make some tough choices. Her extended family is huge, and she couldn't cut them. I'm sorry about Susan and the others, but can't you just explain the situation to them? For me, in that moment, I realized I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. My son had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. With a heavy heart, I conceded calling Susan and my other friends to explain they wouldn't be receiving invitations after all. The hurt in their voices only deepened my growing sadness. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received the final itinerary from the wedding planner. As I reviewed it, I noticed that the mother-son dance, a tradition I had been looking forward to, had been scheduled using a song I didn't recognize. Thomas and I had discussed dancing to What a Wonderful World, a song Robert used to sing to him as a lullaby. This new selection, something contemporary that held no meaning for either of us, had been chosen without consulting me. Even more upsetting, I discovered that the short speech I had been asked to prepare was no longer on the program. In fact, there were no speeches scheduled from anyone on the groom's side, only Cassandra's father, her maid of honor, and the best man, who was Cassandra's brother. When I called Thomas about these changes, he seemed distracted and rushed. Cassandra thought the original song was too slow for a dance, and she's trying to keep speeches to a minimum so they don't drag on. Don't worry about it, Mom. It's not a big deal. But it was a big deal, at least to me. These changes symbolized my growing exclusion from one of the most important days of my son's life, a day I had dreamed about and saved for since he was born. The final straw came during a pre-wedding dinner 2 nights before the ceremony. Cassandra's mother, Eleanor, a willowy woman with an expression of perpetual dissatisfaction, commented on my outfit, a navy blue dress I had purchased specifically for the occasion. "That's what you're wearing to the rehearsal dinner?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. I thought mothers of the groom typically made more of an effort. Before I could respond, Cassandra added, "Mom found the most gorgeous silver gown for the wedding. Designer, of course. What did you end up choosing, Victoria?" The way she said my name made it sound like an afterthought. I described the pale blue beaded dress I had selected after weeks of shopping, a dress that had cost more than I had ever spent on clothing for myself. Eleanor and Cassandra exchanged a look. "Well, as long as it doesn't photograph too matronly," Cassandra said with a thin-knit smile. The photographer is charging us by the hour for editing. Later that evening, I managed to get Thomas alone for a moment. Can we talk? I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. We stepped out onto the restaurant's patio, the Napa Valley landscape spread out before us in the twilight. It should have been a beautiful moment. Honey, I'm feeling very excluded from this wedding, I began. I understand it's Cassandra's day, but you're my only child, and I've looked forward to sharing this experience with you. Instead, I feel like an unwelcome guest. Thomas ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father that it made my heart ache. Mom, please don't do this now. Everyone's stressed enough with the wedding so close. Can't you just go with the flow for a few more days? For me, I've been going with the flow for 14 months, I replied, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. I've accepted every decision, paid for every expense, and stayed quiet when things that were important to me were discarded. At what point do my feelings matter in all this? You're making this harder than it needs to be, Thomas said, his voice taking on a defensive tone. Cassandra says you've been resistant to her vision from the beginning. She says you're trying to make her wedding about you. I felt as if I'd been slapped. Is that what you believe? After everything I've done to support this wedding, to support your relationship? I don't want to argue, Thomas said, already turning back toward the restaurant. Let's just get through the next few days without drama. Okay, please, Mom. Stop making this so difficult. As he walked away, leaving me alone on the patio, I realized that the son I had raised, the thoughtful boy who had grown into a man I was so proud of, had disappeared somewhere inside this relationship. The Thomas I knew would never have dismissed my feelings so callously. The Thomas I knew would have stood up for me. For the first time, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake in supporting this marriage, both emotionally and financially. But it was too late now. In 2 days, Thomas would be Cassandra's husband, and I would have to find a way to accept my new diminished place in his life. That night alone in my hotel room, I barely slept, torn between maternal instinct and respect for my adult son's choices. By morning, I had made a decision. I would put on a brave face, fulfill my role in the wedding, and support Thomas unconditionally. I would swallow my hurt and smile through the next 2 days, giving him the wedding he thought he wanted, even if it broke my heart. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the Napa Valley vineyards stretching out under a perfect blue sky. Despite my sleepless night, I rose early, took extra care with my hair and makeup, and dressed in casual clothes before heading to the venue. The ceremony wasn't until 4 in the afternoon, but I wanted to be available to help with any last-minute preparations. I had packed a special gift for Thomas, a handwritten letter from his father that Robert had given me before he died, entrusting me to pass it to our son on his wedding day. Along with the letter was Robert's pocket watch, a family heirloom that had belonged to his grandfather. These treasures, along with a bottle of champagne for the bridal suite, were carefully arranged in a gift basket. When I arrived at the vineyard estate where the ceremony and reception would take place, the scene was one of organized chaos. Florists were arranging elaborate centerpieces. Catering staff were setting up bars and serving stations. And the wedding planner, Adrienne, was directing everything with clipboard in hand. I approached Adrienne with a warm smile. "Good morning. I'm here to help with anything you need." She returned my smile, though I detected a hint of pity in her eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Marshall. That's very kind of you, but we have everything under control. The bridal party is getting ready in the estate house, and Thomas and his groomsmen are in the guest cottage. Perfect, I said, lifting the gift basket. I'll just drop this off for Thomas. Then maybe I can help with place cards or something. Adrian hesitated. Actually, Ms. Reynolds left specific instructions that no one is to disturb the bridal preparations, even family. Something about maintaining the bride's privacy and reducing stress. I felt a familiar pang of exclusion, but nodded understanding. Of course. What about Thomas? Can I bring this to him at least? Let me check, she said kindly, stepping away to make a call. When she returned, her expression told me everything I needed to know before she spoke. I'm sorry, Mrs. Marshall. The groomsmen are in the middle of photos. The photographer doesn't want any interruptions to the schedule. I swallowed my disappointment. I understand. Could you make sure Thomas gets this before the ceremony? It's important. Absolutely, she promised, taking the basket. I'll personally ensure he receives it. With nothing else to do, I wandered the grounds, admiring the flowers and decor that my money had paid for, but that I had no part in choosing. Everything was objectively beautiful, if a bit generic, looking exactly like the weddings featured in luxury magazines. There was nothing personal, nothing that reflected Thomas or his heritage, not a single nod to the family and history that had shaped him. Around noon, I noticed Cassandra's mother directing staff near the ceremony site. Eleanor was impeccably dressed in designer leisure wear, her diamond jewelry catching the California sunlight. I approached her, determined to maintain civility, despite our strained relationship. Good morning, Eleanor. Everything looks lovely. She turned her surprise at seeing me quickly masked with a cool smile. Victoria, I didn't realize you were here already. I thought I might help with preparations, I explained. How thoughtful, she replied without warmth. But as you can see, the professionals have everything well in hand. Before I could respond, one of Cassandra's bridesmaids approached a tall young woman whose name I couldn't recall. She whispered something to Eleanor, who nodded and turned back to me. If you'll excuse me, Victoria. Bridal emergency. She followed the bridesmaid toward the main house, leaving me standing alone again. By 2:00, guests were beginning to arrive. I returned to my hotel room to change into my formal attire, the pale blue beaded dress that had apparently not met Cassandra's standards. As I dressed, I gave myself a pep talk in the mirror. This was Thomas's day. Whatever happened, I would maintain my dignity and show only love and support for my son. When I returned to the venue at 3:15, the ceremony area was nearly set up. Rows of white chairs faced an elaborate floral arch, with the vineyard creating a stunning backdrop. I noticed that the musicians were setting up a string quartet that was another substantial expense I had covered. As I stood admiring the setting, the wedding planner approached me again, this time with a troubled expression. Mrs. Marshall, I wanted to let you know there's been a change to the seating arrangements for the ceremony. My stomach tightened. What kind of change? Well, she hesitated. Traditionally, the mother of the groom sits in the front row on the right side. But Ms. Reynolds has requested that her mother's sister and family occupy the entire front row on both sides, as they've traveled from Europe for the wedding. I stared at her in disbelief. So where will I be sitting? Second row, right side, she said apologetically. I'm very sorry about this last-minute change. I only just found out myself. The humiliation burned through me. Being moved to the second row at my only son's wedding after everything I had contributed felt like a deliberate insult. But still, I was determined not to create a scene. I see, I said, my voice remarkably steady, despite the emotions roiling inside me. "May I ask who made this decision?" Ms. Reynolds was very specific about the new arrangement. Adrienne replied, her discomfort evident. I did try to explain the traditional protocol, but she was insistent. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for letting me know." I turned away, needing a moment to compose myself. Finding a quiet corner of the garden, I took several deep breaths, fighting back tears that threatened to ruin my carefully applied makeup. This was just one more slight in a long series of them. I could endure it for Thomas's sake. 3 more hours, and the ceremony and dinner would be over. I could do this. When I returned to the ceremony area, guests were being seated. I noticed several of Cassandra's relatives being escorted to the front row, including people who had been introduced to me just the night before at the rehearsal dinner. As I stood waiting to be shown to my seat, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. "Can you believe the mother of the groom tried to change the floral arrangements last minute?" Cassandra was furious, one bridesmaid was saying to another. "Apparently she's been a nightmare the whole time trying to take over everything." The other young woman laughed. "Cassandra says she's just jealous because her own wedding was probably some backyard barbecue. Did you see her rehearsal dinner dress? Total department store, clearance rack." They moved away before they could notice me standing nearby, but the damage was done. The narrative Cassandra had created about me, apparently shared freely among her friends and family, bore no resemblance to reality. In her version, I was an interfering, tasteless woman, trying to ruin her perfect day, rather than the supportive mother who had financed the entire extravagant affair, while being systematically excluded from it. As guests continued to arrive, I noticed the usher had skipped over me several times, seating other guests who had arrived after me. Finally, I approached him directly. "Excuse me. I'm Victoria Marshall, the groom's mother. Could you show me to my seat?" The young man, one of Cassandra's cousins, looked flustered. "Oh yes, Mrs. Marshall. Just one moment." He conferred with another usher, both of them glancing at me repeatedly during their whispered conversation. Meanwhile, I could see that nearly all seats were now filled, including the entire front row where I should have been sitting. Guests were looking at me curiously as I stood alone unceremoniously, waiting to be seated at my own son's wedding. Finally, the usher returned. "This way, Mrs. Marshall." He led me to the second row, where a single seat remained, on the far end, next to people I didn't recognize. As I sat down, I felt a flash of anger cutting through my hurt. This treatment was beyond inconsiderate. It was deliberately humiliating. But still, I reminded myself this was Thomas's wedding day. I would not be the one to create a scene. The music changed, signaling the start of the ceremony. The groomsmen began to file in, followed by Thomas, handsome in his tuxedo, his face solemn. I searched his expression for any sign that he had received his father's letter and watch any acknowledgement of the connection to his past as he moved toward his future. But his eyes didn't seek me out in the crowd, and his expression revealed nothing. The bridesmaids processed next, a parade of matching blush-colored gowns. And finally, Cassandra appeared on her father's arm, undeniably beautiful, in an elaborate lace gown with a cathedral-length veil. The guests rose as one, admiring murmurs rippling through the crowd. As Cassandra and her father passed my row, her eyes briefly met mine. There was no warmth there, no inclusion in her joy, just a cool assessment before she looked away, proceeding toward my son. In that brief exchange, I understood completely that in her mind, I was merely a necessary inconvenience, a checkbook with an unfortunate human attachment. The ceremony began, the officiant speaking about love and commitment in generic terms that could have applied to any couple anywhere. There were no personal anecdotes, no references to Thomas and Cassandra's journey together, no meaningful readings or music that reflected their relationship. It was as impersonal as it was expensive, a wedding designed more for Instagram than for emotional significance. As I watched my son pledge his life to a woman who had systematically isolated him from me, I felt a profound sadness that went beyond the day's indignities. I was witnessing the culmination of a relationship built on control rather than partnership, and I feared for Thomas's future happiness. When the ceremony concluded, the guests were directed to a cocktail area, while the wedding party took photos. I made my way there slowly, steeling myself for more hours of polite smiles and small talk with people who had been fed Cassandra's distorted version of me. At the cocktail reception, I found myself alone, despite the crowded space. Cassandra's family clustered together in tight groups, occasionally glancing my way, but never approaching. The few guests from Thomas's side, mostly his college friends, were absorbed with each other, perhaps feeling as out of place as I did in this carefully curated celebration. I was standing near one of the bars, sipping a glass of champagne, when Adrian, the wedding planner, approached me again. "Mrs. Marshall," she said quietly, "the photographer is asking if you're available for family photos now." A small relief flooded through me. At least I would be included in some of the formal photographs, a record of my presence on this day. "Of course," I replied, setting down my glass. "Where should I go?" "They're set up by the rose garden. I can show you." I followed her across the grounds to where the photographer had created a portrait area with the vineyard as a backdrop. Thomas was there with several groomsmen, but Cassandra and her bridesmaids were nowhere to be seen. "We'll do some shots with just the groom's family while we wait for the bride," the photographer explained, positioning Thomas next to me. It was the first moment I'd had with my son all day. I squeezed his arm gently. "You look so handsome," I told him. "Your father would have been so proud." Thomas gave me a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, Mom." His voice was distant, as if his mind were elsewhere. "Did you receive the gift I brought with your father's letter?" Before he could answer, there was a commotion as Cassandra and her bridesmaids arrived, a flurry of blush tulle and flower crowns. Cassandra took in the scene, her eyes narrowing when she saw me standing next to Thomas. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice carrying across the garden. The photographer looked up from his camera. "Just getting some shots with the groom's family while we waited for you, Ms. Reynolds." Cassandra's expression darkened. We agreed on the photo sequence. Bridal party first, then combined family shots. Her tone was accusatory, as if an unforgivable breach had occurred. "It seemed efficient to use the time," the photographer explained, clearly taken aback by her reaction. "We still have plenty of daylight for all the combinations we discussed." "That's not the point," Cassandra snapped. She turned to Thomas. "Can you please come with me for a moment? We need to discuss something." Thomas immediately stepped away from me, following Cassandra several yards away, where they engaged in an intense, whispered conversation. I could see Cassandra gesturing emphatically, while Thomas mostly listened, his shoulders progressively slumping. The bridesmaids exchanged glances, some looking uncomfortable, others appearing almost amused by the drama. I stood alone, acutely aware of being the subject of their conversation. After what felt like an eternity, But was probably less than 2 minutes, Thomas and Cassandra returned. Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes, but Cassandra looked directly at me, her expression cold. "There's been a misunderstanding," she announced, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We won't be doing separate family photos, only full group shots with both families together as originally planned." The photographer looked confused. "But we always do individual family groupings. It's standard for weddings." "Not at my wedding," Cassandra said firmly. "We're on a tight schedule and we need to stick to the plan." I understood what was happening. This was yet another calculated move to minimize my presence, to ensure I wouldn't have even a few private photos with my son on his wedding day. Something inside me, some last reserve of patience and understanding, began to crack. I had endured months of disrespect and exclusion. I had paid for an extravagant wedding where I was treated as an unwelcome intruder. I had watched my son transform from a thoughtful, considerate man into someone who would allow his mother to be humiliated repeatedly to please his bride. Still, I might have continued to endure it all, for Thomas's sake, swallowing my hurt and maintaining my dignity. But what happened next made that impossible. As the photographer tried to organize everyone for the combined family photos, I stepped forward to take my place. Cassandra, who was arranging her dress, looked up and saw me. The contempt that flashed across her face was unmistakable. And then, loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear, she said, "What are you doing here? You're not welcome in these photos." A hushed shock fell over the group. The photographer froze, camera halfway to his face. The bridesmaids and groomsmen stared, some with surprise, others with what looked like satisfaction, as if a long-anticipated confrontation was finally happening. I stood perfectly still, unable to believe what I had just heard. "Excuse me." Cassandra stepped closer, her voice rising. "I said, you're not welcome. Not in the photos, not at the reception, not anywhere. This is my wedding day, and I'm tired of pretending I want you here when you've done nothing but try to undermine me from day one." I looked to Thomas, waiting for him to defend me, to say something, anything, to stop this public humiliation. But he stood silently beside Cassandra, eyes fixed on the ground. "Thomas," I said quietly, giving him one last chance to be the son I had raised. He looked up briefly, his expression conflicted, but remained silent. Cassandra, apparently emboldened by his tacit support, continued, "You've been difficult from the beginning, trying to force your outdated ideas on my wedding. I've been patient because you're Thomas's mother, but I'm done accommodating you. You're not welcome here. Go away." Those final words, shouted across the garden, where guests milling nearby could clearly hear, seemed to echo in the stunned silence that followed. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, a physical ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, clarifying anger. Not a hot, reactive rage, but a cold, irresolute determination. I looked directly at Cassandra, then at my son, who had chosen her over me, over decency itself. "I understand," I said, my voice remarkably steady. Then I turned and walked away, head high, back straight, not giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break down. As I walked through the beautifully decorated venue, past arrangements I had paid for, and champagne I had selected past guests, who whispered and stared, I made a decision that would change everything. If they didn't want me at this wedding, then there wouldn't be a wedding at all. Not one that I was paying for, at least. I returned to my hotel room, closed the door behind me, and finally allowed the tears to come. I cried for the loss of the son I thought I knew, for the relationship that might never recover, for the dreams I had held of being part of this milestone in his life. But then, as the tears subsided, I reached for my phone and began making calls. The first was to my credit card company. I need to cancel all pending charges from the following vendors, I said, listing the caterer, the venue, the photographer, and every other service provider whose final payments were still pending. Next, I called each vendor, directly explaining that due to unfortunate circumstances, I would no longer be covering their services for the remainder of the Reynolds-Marshall wedding. Some were sympathetic, others strictly professional, but all understood one simple fact: no payment, no service. Within an hour, I had systematically dismantled the elaborate celebration that was supposed to be taking place. The caterers would not be serving the 5-course dinner. The bar would not be pouring the premium liquor. The band would not be performing for the reception. The late-night snack station, the photo booth, the sparkler, send-off, all canceled. As I packed my belongings, preparing to check out and drive back to San Francisco, where I would stay the night before flying home to Boston, my phone exploded with notifications. Thomas calling, Cassandra calling, the wedding planner, Thomas again, text messages flooding in. I silenced the phone, finished packing, and took one last look around the room. On the desk sat the mother of the groom gift that Cassandra had given me at the rehearsal dinner, an impersonal silver picture frame with their engagement photo. I left it there, a small act of severance. At the front desk, I checked out calmly, ignoring the curious looks from the staff, who had undoubtedly begun to hear about the drama unfolding at the wedding. I had just loaded my suitcase into my rental car when Thomas came running into the parking lot, his tie loose, his face flushed with anger. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "The caterers just left. The bar staff is packing up. What did you do, Mom?" I looked at my son, this stranger, who had stood by while his bride publicly humiliated his mother. "I was told I wasn't welcome at the wedding," I said evenly. "So I withdrew my welcome as well, and my financial support." "You can't do this," Thomas exploded. "Do you have any idea how this makes me look? Cassandra is devastated." "I'm sure she is," I replied. "Actions have consequences, Thomas, both hers and yours." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that you stood there and said nothing while the woman you're marrying threw your mother out of your wedding. The mother who raised you alone after your father died. The mother who paid for every aspect of this elaborate day that was designed to exclude her at every turn." Thomas ran his hand through his hair in frustration, another echo of his father that pierced my heart. "You don't understand. Cassandra has been under so much stress. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. She told me to go away, that I wasn't welcome. There's only one way to mean that, Thomas." I opened the car door. "I hope your marriage brings you happiness. I truly do. But I won't be disrespected and then asked to pay for the privilege." "So what are we supposed to do now?" he asked, desperation replacing anger in his voice. "There are 150 people here expecting a reception. I suggest you ask your future in-laws to step in. Cassandra's father is a successful surgeon, isn't he? Surely they can cover the costs they should have contributed in the first place." "They won't," Thomas said, his voice small. "They've already said they can't help." "Then I suppose you'll have to scale back your expectations," I replied. "Something you might want to get used to in this marriage." Before he could respond, I got into the car and closed the door, effectively ending the conversation. As I drove away, I could see Thomas in the rearview mirror, standing alone in the parking lot, a forlorn figure in his wedding tuxedo. The grief would come later, I knew. The second guessing, the worry about long-term damage to my relationship with my only child. But in that moment, as I drove through the beautiful Napa Valley, bathed in golden afternoon light, I felt something unexpected relief. For the first time in over a year, I had stood up for myself. I had refused to be a silent contributor to my own humiliation. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same strength and dignity that had carried me through widowhood and single parenthood. I would survive this too. My phone continued to buzz with messages as I drove, but I ignored them all. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face the fallout. Tonight, I would allow myself to mourn the wedding that should have been the relationship I had hoped for, and the son who had forgotten the values I thought I had instilled in him. As the miles stretched between me and the vineyard, I found myself thinking not of what I had lost, but what I might yet reclaim: my self-respect, my independence, and perhaps, someday, a relationship with Thomas built on mutual respect rather than obligation. The wedding may have been a disaster, but in its collapse, I had found something invaluable: the courage to value myself as much as I had always valued my son. The drive from Napa Valley to San Francisco took just over an hour, though it felt much longer as my mind replayed the day's events in an endless loop. By the time I reached my hotel near the airport, emotional exhaustion had overtaken anger, leaving me hollow and uncertain. I checked in mechanically, barely registering the concerned looks from the reception staff, who must have noticed my red-rimmed eyes and formal attire, so at odds with my obvious distress. In my room, I finally turned my phone back on, bracing myself for the barrage of notifications. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, 16 voicemails. Thomas had called 11 times, his messages growing increasingly frantic, then angry, then pleading. Cassandra had called 5 times, her voicemails a study in escalating rage. The wedding planner, various vendors, even a few guests had reached out, confusion and concern evident in their messages. I scrolled through the texts, noting with a detached sort of interest how the tone shifted as the afternoon progressed. The early ones demanded explanations and immediate contact. The later ones reported the chaos that had ensued in my absence. According to various accounts, the reception had devolved into a significantly scaled-down affair. The venue had allowed use of the space since it was already set up, but with minimal staff. Some local pizzas had been ordered as a replacement for the canceled 5-course meal. The open bar had become cash only, and many guests had left early, the celebratory atmosphere effectively ruined. One text from Susan, my oldest friend, who had been uninvited by Cassandra, simply read, "I just heard what happened. Are you okay? Call me when you can." I set the phone down without responding to anyone. I would face it all tomorrow. Tonight, I needed to process my own feelings before dealing with others' reactions. After a long shower that did little to wash away the day's emotional residue, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, in a bathrobe, staring at the generic landscape painting on the wall. How had it come to this? When had my sweet, thoughtful boy become a man who would allow his mother to be treated so callously? Had I somehow failed him in his upbringing, or was this transformation entirely Cassandra's influence. I thought back to the early days of their relationship, searching for signs I might have missed. There had been small moments, subtle shifts in Thomas's behavior that I had attributed to the natural evolution of a young man in love. His increasing tendency to defer to Cassandra, the way he began to echo her opinions rather than express his own, his growing reluctance to spend time alone with me when they visited. The pattern was clear in retrospect. Cassandra had been systematically separating Thomas from me, from his own independence, reshaping him into an extension of herself rather than a partner. And I, not wanting to be the interfering mother, had stood by and watched it happen. The guilt of this realization was almost as painful as the day's humiliation. Perhaps if I had spoken up sooner, set boundaries, earlier today's disaster might have been avoided. Or perhaps it would have only accelerated the inevitable confrontation. By morning, exhaustion had granted me a sort of numb clarity. I ordered room service breakfast that I barely touched, then began methodically responding to messages. To Susan and my other close friends, I sent brief explanations and assurances that I was okay, just needing time. To the wedding planner and vendors who had reached out, I sent professional apologies for the disruption, reiterating that I was no longer financially responsible for the event. Thomas had sent a final text at 3 a.m. "We need to talk about how you're going to make this right. Call me when you get this." The presumption in his message, the assumption that I would simply fix what Cassandra had broken, ignited a fresh spark of indignation. I would speak with my son, but not yet, and certainly not on his terms. Instead, I sent a single text. "I'm flying home today. We can speak when emotions have cooled." I checked out early, returned the rental car, and spent 3 hours at the airport before my flight, sitting in a busy terminal, watching travelers rush past, each absorbed in their own dramas, none aware of the invisible wreckage I carried. The flight back to Boston was mercifully uneventful. I slept most of the way, my body and mind shutting down in self-preservation. When I finally unlocked the door to my home, the familiar surroundings felt both comforting and strange, as if I had been away for years rather than days. I moved through the rooms slowly, reacquainting myself with my life before the wedding disaster. Photos of Thomas throughout his childhood watched me from shelves and walls, his smiling face a reminder of the boy he had been, the relationship we had shared. On the mantel sat a family portrait, taken the Christmas before Robert died, the three of us smiling, unaware of how soon our family would be fractured. I picked it up, studying my late husband's face, wondering what advice he would offer now. "You always knew what to say to Thomas," I whispered to the photograph. "He listened to you in a way he never quite did to me." Replacing the frame, I made a decision. I needed separation time to rebuild my sense of self, outside of my identity as Thomas's mother. The role that had defined me for nearly 3 decades had been fundamentally altered, and I needed to understand who I was beyond it. I unplugged my landline, silenced my cell phone, and spent the next week in a self-imposed retreat. I slept late, took long walks, read books that had been gathering dust on my nightstand, and began to journal my thoughts and feelings about what had happened. By the end of that week, 2 things had become clear. First, while I mourned the breakdown of my relationship with Thomas, I did not regret standing up for myself. The pattern of disrespect would have continued if I had not drawn a firm line. Second, my life had become too narrowly focused on my son. Since Robert's death, I had poured all my energy and attention into Thomas, defining my happiness through his. This imbalance had left me vulnerable to the exact kind of heartbreak I was now experiencing. It was time to reclaim parts of myself that had nothing to do with being Thomas's mother. I began with small steps. I called the local community college and registered for an art history class I had always wanted to take. I joined a walking group for women over 50 that met 3 mornings a week. I volunteered at the public library, shelving books, and helping with children's story hour. Each new activity added a layer of identity beyond Thomas's mother. Each new acquaintance saw me simply as Victoria, not as an extension of my son. The hole in my heart remained, but it no longer defined every moment of every day. 3 weeks after the wedding, I finally turned my phone back on, fully prepared to face whatever awaited me. There were dozens of voicemails and texts from Thomas, their tone evolving from anger to frustration, to eventually something approaching contrition. His most recent message, sent 2 days earlier, caught my attention. "Mom, I understand if you don't want to talk to me. I wouldn't want to talk to me either. But when you're ready, I need to tell you some things. About the wedding day, about what's been happening since. Please call when you can." There was a vulnerability in his words that had been missing from his earlier communications. Still, I wasn't ready to jump at his call. Instead, I texted back, "I'm glad to hear from you. I need a little more time, but I'll be in touch soon." His response came almost immediately. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." It was another 2 weeks before I felt centered enough to face a conversation with Thomas. By then, nearly 6 weeks had passed since the wedding. 6 weeks of emotional processing, of rebuilding my sense of self, of creating a life that could withstand whatever came next in my relationship with my son. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between my home and the apartment Thomas shared with Cassandra in the city. I arrived early, selecting a table in a quiet corner, preparing myself for whatever version of my son might appear. When Thomas walked in, I was struck by how tired he looked. There were shadows under his eyes, and he had lost weight, his collar looser around his neck than I remembered. He spotted me and hesitated briefly before approaching uncertainty in every movement. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Hello, Thomas," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat down carefully, as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter the fragile moment. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "But we're family. That still means something to me." A server approached, and we both ordered coffee, using the brief interaction to gather our thoughts. When we were alone again, Thomas spoke first. "I owe you an apology," he said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "What happened at the wedding, the way Cassandra spoke to you, the way I didn't defend you, it was unforgivable." I took a measured breath. "Yes, it was." He flinched slightly at my directness, but nodded. "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness, not right away, maybe not ever. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry, for allowing it to happen." "Why did you—" I asked the question that had haunted me for weeks. "Why did you stand there and say nothing while she humiliated me?" Thomas stared into his coffee cup. "I've been asking myself the same question every day since." He looked up, his expression pained. "The simplest answer is that I was a coward. I've been a coward for a long time when it comes to Cassandra." His honesty surprised me. I had expected excuses, justifications, perhaps even continued blame. His self-awareness suggested a shift I hadn't anticipated. "What do you mean?" I prompted. "Cassandra has always been controlling," he said carefully. "At first, I found it attractive, how certain she was about everything, how she took charge. After Dad died, I felt lost for so long. Cassandra's confidence seemed like an anchor." I nodded, understanding better than he knew. Hadn't I felt similarly adrift after Robert's death? But over time, Thomas continued, it became less about her confidence and more about control. She needed to control everything, including me, especially me. And somewhere along the way, I started to lose myself in trying to keep her happy. "I noticed the change in you," I said quietly. "You stopped expressing your own opinions. You became her echo." "I know," he acknowledged. "It happened so gradually that I barely noticed. Each time I gave in to avoid conflict, it became easier to give in the next time. By the wedding, standing up to her felt impossible." The server returned with our coffees, providing another brief respite from the intensity of our conversation. When she left, Thomas continued, his voice lower. "After you left, after all the vendors started canceling, everything fell apart. Cassandra was hysterical, alternating between rage and tears. Her parents refused to step in financially, saying I needed to handle my family problems. We ended up with delivery pizza at our wedding reception, Mom. Most of the guests left early. I felt a flash of satisfaction at this, immediately followed by guilt. I hadn't wanted to ruin their day, only to stand up for myself. That must have been difficult," I said neutrally. "It was humiliating," Thomas admitted. "But you know what the worst part was? When I called you that night, I wasn't even thinking about how you felt, how you'd been treated. I was only thinking about how to fix the reception, how to appease Cassandra. I was still putting her feelings above everyone else's, including yours, including my own." His insight surprised me again. "What changed?" "The honeymoon," he said with a humorless laugh. "Or the lack of one. We'd been planning to go to the Maldives, another expense you were covering. When that fell through, we went back to our apartment and spent 2 weeks in what I can only describe as the coldest war I've ever experienced." He took a sip of coffee before continuing. "Cassandra blamed me for everything, said I should have controlled you, better prevented you from canceling the payments. When I finally suggested that maybe, just maybe, she shouldn't have told my mother to leave the wedding, she exploded. Said I was betraying her, choosing you over her." "Sounds familiar," I murmured. "Yes," Thomas acknowledged. "The same way she accused me of betraying her whenever I wanted to spend time with you or talk to you on the phone without her listening in or include any of our family traditions in the wedding." I sat very still, absorbing his words. "How did you not see this pattern earlier?" "I did see it," he admitted. "I just didn't want to acknowledge what it meant. It was easier to give in, to tell myself she was just stressed about the wedding, that things would improve afterward." He shook his head. "They didn't." "And now?" I asked carefully. Thomas met my gaze steadily. "Now I'm in marriage counseling. Alone, because Cassandra refuses to go. Says there's nothing wrong with her, only with me and my inability to separate from my mother." The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so sad. "Thomas, I never wanted to come between you and Cassandra. I only wanted to be treated with basic respect. I know that now," he said. "I think I always knew it. I just couldn't admit it to myself." He hesitated before adding, "We're not doing well, Mom. Cassandra and I. The wedding disaster brought everything to the surface, all the control issues, the isolation tactics. I'm finally seeing clearly what's been happening." I reached across the table and took his hand, the first physical contact between us since before the wedding. "I'm sorry, Thomas. Despite everything, I never wanted you to be unhappy." He squeezed my hand. "I know, and that's why I needed to see you, to tell you that you were right to stand up for yourself. You deserved better than how we treated you, how I treated you." We sat in silence for a moment, the air between us lighter than it had been in months, perhaps years. "Where do we go from here?" I finally asked. "I don't know," Thomas answered honestly. "I'm trying to figure out my marriage, whether it's salvageable or whether it was built on an unhealthy foundation from the start. But I do know that I want to rebuild my relationship with you, if you'll let me." "I'd like that," I said softly. "But things will need to be different." He nodded. "They already are. I'm finding my voice again, remembering who I was before I became what Cassandra wanted me to be." "I'd like to get to know that person," I told him. "The authentic Thomas." We talked for another hour, carefully navigating the new boundaries of our relationship. We agreed to have dinner once a month, just the two of us, a standing commitment to maintaining our connection. Thomas would continue his counseling, working to understand the patterns that had led him to subjugate his own needs and values to Cassandra's demands. As we prepared to leave, Thomas handed me an envelope. "Dad's letter," he explained. "Cassandra hid it from me on the wedding day. I found it later when I was looking for some paperwork. I've read it, but I thought you might want it back for safekeeping." I took the envelope, my throat tight with emotion. "Thank you. This means a lot to me." "It meant a lot to me too," Thomas said quietly. Dad's words, they helped me see some hard truths about myself, about the man he raised me to be versus the man I've been lately. We walked out of the cafe together, pausing on the sidewalk before going our separate ways. Thomas hesitated, then asked, "Can I hug you, Mom?" Instead of answering, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him, feeling the tension in his body gradually release as he returned the embrace. "I love you," I whispered. That never stopped, even at my angriest. "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm going to work hard to deserve that love again." As I drove home, I reflected on our conversation, on the painful journey that had led us to this moment of tentative reconciliation. The wedding disaster had been exactly that, a disaster, but from its ashes, something new and potentially stronger was emerging. Thomas and I met for dinner the following month as planned. He came alone, explaining that he had moved out of the apartment he shared with Cassandra, taking a small place of his own while they decided the future of their marriage. He seemed lighter, somehow, more like the son I remembered, his own opinions and sense of humor re-emerging from the shadow of Cassandra's dominance. Our healing continued slowly over the following months. Thomas began joining me for holiday meals again, bringing thoughtful gifts and genuinely engaging with my friends, who had always been like extended family to him. He called regularly, not out of obligation, but with real things to share, real interest in my life. 4 months after our reconciliation, Thomas told me he had filed for divorce. Cassandra had refused all attempts at counseling, had belittled his efforts to establish healthier patterns, had ultimately given him an ultimatum: her way or no way at all. "I chose no way at all," he said simply. "It hurts, and it's scary to start over, but I can't keep living someone else's version of my life." I felt sadness for his pain, but pride in his courage. The son I had raised was finding his way back to himself. As for me, I continued building my post-wedding disaster life. The art history class led to a volunteer position at the local museum. The walking group introduced me to 3 women who became close friends, companions for theater outings, and weekend trips to the coast. My world, which had shrunk to orbit around Thomas after Robert's death, expanded again, rich with new experiences and relationships. The wedding disaster, painful as it was, had forced both Thomas and me to confront uncomfortable truths and make difficult changes. In standing up for myself, I had not only reclaimed my own dignity, but had inadvertently given my son the push he needed to reclaim his authentic self as well. Sometimes, the most profound growth emerges from our most painful experiences. Sometimes we need to lose what we thought we wanted in order to discover what we truly need. And sometimes the weddings that don't happen are more valuable than those that do when they lead us back to our true selves and the relationships that genuinely sustain us. It's been 3 years since that fateful wedding day in Napa Valley. 3 years of healing growth and rebuilding, not just my relationship with Thomas, but my relationship with myself. Looking back, I can now see that day as a turning point, rather than just a painful memory. The first 6 months after the wedding were the hardest. Even with our initial reconciliation, Thomas and I were still finding our way back to each other, carefully navigating new boundaries and old hurts. During this time, I focused on my own healing journey, something I had neglected for too long. I joined a support group for parents estranged from adult children, even though Thomas and I were working on our relationship. The stories I heard there helped me understand that my experience, while painful, was not unique. Many parents had faced similar situations, especially when controlling partners entered the picture. The group gave me tools for processing my emotions and establishing healthy boundaries. Parallel to this, I dove deeper into rediscovering who Victoria was beyond being Thomas's mother or Robert's widow. I took a painting class that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. My first attempts were laughably bad, but the joy of creating something, of expressing myself without words, became a form of therapy. The community college classes expanded to include a literature course, focusing on women's journeys, stories that resonated deeply with my own experience of loss and reinvention. My friendship circle widened as well. Susan, my oldest friend who had been uninvited from the wedding, became my rock during this period. We took a 2-week trip to Portugal, something we had talked about doing for years, but had never prioritized. Walking through ancient streets, sampling local wines, and laughing under Mediterranean skies, I felt myself expanding beyond the confines of the life I had limited myself to. Meanwhile, Thomas was going through his own metamorphosis. The divorce from Cassandra was finalized 8 months after he filed. It was a messy, contentious process that drained him emotionally and financially. Cassandra fought for everything, including items that held sentimental value to Thomas's family, seeming to want to hurt him as much as possible on her way out. "She's showing me exactly who she's always been," Thomas told me during this period. "I just couldn't see it clearly before." The counseling he continued throughout this process helped him understand the dynamics that had led him into such an unhealthy relationship. He learned about emotional manipulation, about how his grief over losing his father had left him vulnerable to someone who presented herself as a strong, decisive force in his life. "I mistook control for strength," he explained during one of our monthly dinners, "and I confused my own compliance with being supportive. I thought giving up parts of myself was what love required." Watching my son reclaim his identity was perhaps the most healing aspect of this entire journey for me. The Thomas who emerged from the divorce was more reflective, more authentic, and more grounded than I had seen him in years. He resumed old friendships that Cassandra had discouraged, rediscovered hobbies he had abandoned to please her, and eventually started dating again, this time with a clearer understanding of what a healthy relationship should look like. One unexpected outcome of our shared experience was how it changed the dynamic between us. Before, I had been the mother, the advice giver, the one who worried and supported. Now we related to each other more as equals, two adults who had weathered difficult experiences and emerged stronger. Thomas began to see me as a whole person with my own dreams and struggles, not just in relation to him. About 18 months after the wedding disaster, Thomas surprised me by suggesting we use some of the money I had saved for his wedding for a different purpose. "You've been talking about wanting to see the Grand Canyon since I was a kid," he said. "Why don't we go together?" The trip we took that fall became a profound, bonding experience. Standing at the edge of that magnificent chasm, watching the light change the colors of ancient rock throughout the day, we had conversations that would have been impossible before. Thomas spoke openly about his marriage, about the red flags he had ignored, about his regrets. "I keep thinking about Dad's letter," he said one evening as we watched the sunset paint the canyon walls in fiery oranges and deep purples. "About what he wrote about choosing a partner who makes you more yourself, not less. He said, the right person expands your world. They don't shrink it." How did I forget that, Mom? We often can't see clearly when we're in the middle of something, I told him, especially when it changes gradually. The best thing you can do is learn from it. I have, he assured me. I'll never silence my own voice like that again. And I'll never stand by while someone disrespects the people I love. That promise was tested about a year later when Thomas began dating Eleanor, a colleague from his engineering firm. She was intelligent, independent, and initially very charming. The first time Thomas brought her to dinner at my home, everything seemed wonderful. She asked thoughtful questions, complimented my cooking, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. But during their third visit, I noticed something troubling. Thomas mentioned a promotion he was considering applying for, and Eleanor immediately began listing reasons why it wasn't a good idea, why he wasn't ready. I watched my son's enthusiasm dim under her criticism, a familiar pattern that sent warning signals through me. After Eleanor went to the restroom, I considered whether to say anything. The old me would have stayed silent, not wanting to interfere. But our new relationship was built on honesty. That seemed a bit dismissive, I said quietly. The way she responded to your promotion news. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I noticed that too. It's not the first time. I'll talk to her about it. The following week, Thomas called to tell me he and Eleanor had had a serious conversation about communication patterns and support. I told her I need a partner who believes in me, not someone who cuts me down. She was defensive at first, but ultimately understood. We're going to work on it. I was immensely proud of him in that moment, not because he had taken my observation to heart, but because he had valued himself enough to address the issue directly, rather than slipping back into old patterns of compliance. Eleanor rose to the occasion, demonstrating that unlike Cassandra, she was capable of self-reflection and growth. Their relationship continued becoming healthier through honest communication. When Thomas proposed to her a year later, it was with clear eyes and a strong sense of self. This time is different, Mom, he assured me. We're partners equals. I know who I am with her, and it's still me. Their wedding was everything the first one should have been: modest, meaningful, and centered on their genuine commitment rather than external appearances. It was held in the garden of Eleanor's parents' home, with only 50 guests, mostly family and close friends. I was involved in the planning, to the extent that I wanted to be, my input welcomed, but never demanded. The morning of the wedding, Thomas asked me to help him with his tie, a simple act that brought tears to my eyes, as I remembered doing the same when he was a boy, learning to dress for his first school dance. "I want to thank you," he said as I straightened his collar, "for standing up for yourself that day in Napa. It was the wake-up call I needed, even though I couldn't see it at the time. I never wanted to hurt you," I told him. "I just couldn't continue enabling my own mistreatment." "I know," he replied. "You taught me one of the most important lessons of my life, that love without respect isn't really love at all." I carry that with me every day. During the ceremony, when the officiant invited the mothers of the bride and groom to light unity candles, I stood proudly beside Eleanor's mother, both of us honored and included. Thomas and Eleanor had written their own vows, and I heard echoes of Robert's letter in my son's promises to expand rather than diminish his bride's world, to listen as much as he spoke, to respect her as an equal partner in all things. At the reception, I gave a short speech that I had been invited to prepare, sharing stories of Thomas's childhood and welcoming Eleanor into our family with genuine warmth. When Thomas and I danced to "What a Wonderful World," the song that should have played at his first wedding, I felt the circle of our journey complete. Today, Thomas and Eleanor are expecting their first child, a daughter they plan to name Robin after Robert. They have purchased a home not far from mine, close enough for regular visits, but with healthy boundaries intact. Thomas continues to thrive in his career, recently receiving the promotion he had once been discouraged from pursuing. As for me, I've found a new chapter in life I never anticipated. The art classes I took for healing led to a passion for painting landscapes. Last year, I had my first small exhibition at a local gallery, an achievement that brought me immense pride. I've made new friends, traveled to places I'd always dreamed of visiting, and even began dating again, though I'm in no rush to replace the solitude I've come to value. The wedding disaster that once seemed like the greatest heartbreak of my life became, in retrospect, a gateway to a more authentic existence for both Thomas and me. By canceling the funding for a celebration built on disrespect, I inadvertently created space for something far more valuable to grow in its place: genuine connection, mutual respect, and the courage to stand in our truth. Life's most painful moments often contain the seeds of our greatest growth. In standing up for my dignity that day, I not only reclaimed my self-respect, but helped my son find his way back to the values that truly matter. Sometimes, love means having the courage to draw a line, to say no more, to demand better for yourself, and by extension, for everyone involved. What appeared to be an ending became a beginning, a painful but necessary redirection toward a life of authenticity and true connection. And for that unexpected gift, I am profoundly grateful. Have you ever had to make a difficult stand that ultimately led to healing? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself can sometimes be the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for others. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that it's never too late to reclaim your worth and rewrite your story.